So you may remember, a couple of weeks now back, we saw at least Conservative Home try to pitch the idea that they could fix the Northern Ireland Protocol, that only if, once again, they were listened to and they did things this way, they could be listened to. And of course, as we said before, you run into problems of um, well, what do you do about the ERG? What do you do about the DUP? Two currently of the biggest forces and certainly the biggest problems because both have different ideas, but one central pillar that they both certainly agree upon. Well, not that certainly that they agree upon, but certainly the biggest sticking point is that they cannot seem to acknowledge the reality of the situation on the ground that we've been through before this many, many times. But I'll go over again just for you now, just to explain the sheer problems. So, first of all, you cannot have a border between the North of Ireland and the Republic of Ireland strictly because the Good Friday Agreement, which we have signed as an international agreement, has said specifically, no, you cannot have such a border. Meaning that in any sort of post hard Brexit world, which is what the ERG is, and certainly what the DUP also pushed for, was that you had to have a border somewhere. After all, they want outside of the customs union, they want outside of the single market. So what do you do? Well, you've got to have one in the Irish Sea. And of course, even eventually, Boris Johnson said, I could never countenance doing such a thing. And of course, he went and did so. Even Frost, who again helped to negotiate this entire deal, now says he wants to completely undo it because it's bad. Well, you negotiated it, Frost. So any failures of this deal are entirely on Frost and Johnson for supporting this, and of course, any other Brexiteer backer who backed this bill to, quote, get Brexit done because they were so desperately trying to sort of move on. But as we've said many, many times, there's so many parts about Brexit that we just have not moved on from because these Brexiteers do not actually have any legitimate answers or any actual solutions to the problems that their Brexit created. So today we're going to go looking at Conservative Home again to see what new solution they have for the Northern Ireland Protocol and to how you can actually, according to Henry Hill here, strike a balance between the DUP and the ERG that would at least maybe sort of settle the situation. Let's see how far off the mark they can go this time. So, as always, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and a rotation link called Buy Me Coffee Week. Well, Buy Me Coffee. And of course, as always, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, do ring the bell as well. And of course, there's the YouTube thank you button and the Pony Club down below. You can join as well. So let's crack on over to Conservative Home then. Again, this is from Conservative Home, with the title of What a Protocol Deal That Satisfies the DUP and ERG Without Insisting on Perfection Might Look Like. So essentially, Henry Hill trying to go for the bodge job, but at least the bodge job that would somewhat, maybe not fully, but at least leave the DUP and the ERG going, okay, maybe we can live with this. I have a sneaking suspicion that might not be the case because I can see, as we saw last time we covered the Conservative Home's big idea to solve this, those ideas would not fly at all, certainly past the DUP or even the ERG. But let's crack on with this. So, this morning, Stephen Booth looks at whether the deal between the United Kingdom and the European Union on reforming the Northern Ireland Protocol might look like. Previously, I suggested that a deal which ducks the hard governance questions that vex the Democratic Unionists and the European Research Group would not get Stormont back up and running. And our editor having earlier suggested that if it could, it might be Rishi Sunak's preferred option. Again, we covered that last time. Like I say, big problems. Certainly, the DUP would still be stonewalling this very much so because, again, it seems that many Conservatives do not even seem to understand really the DUP and who they really got into bed with to actually to sign this oven-ready Brexit deal that was sort of sold. So, we still await the actual shape of the deal, which is apparently awaiting approval from Number 10. But whilst we wait, it is worth considering the question: what sort of deal should the ERG and DUP accept? The two most salient points are these. First, both is entirely right that, quote, no compromise will be perfect. And yet, I have to say this now, the Northern Ireland Protocol is all about compromise. They have compromised as much as they possibly could. In fact, the best compromise, which both the ERG and the DUP refused to accept, was Theresa May's deal. They hate it with a passion, but here's the thing. Theresa May's deal, the whole backstop, would have been far, far better a deal, but they didn't do it because they could not accept the compromises that would come with it. So, let's carry on. So, there is a lot of potential upsides for the UK in negotiations, and the real danger that we might miss them by insisting on an ideal outcome from the off. Second, the DUP know that Stormont is their best bargaining chip and that they will probably only get to play it once. It is their walkout, combined with the pressure created with the looming 25th anniversary of the Belfast Agreement, that goes a long way to explain why their concerns are suddenly being taken seriously by the sort of people who back in 2017 thought Theresa May should, as Tony Collar reported for the RTE in 2017, quote, do a brave and risky thing and say to the DUP, listen, you guys, you've got nowhere else to go, so this is what's going to happen. Well, certainly they should do that, and that's what Theresa May should have done. You should have just gone, look, DUP, this is what's going to happen. The what you are really asking for is not going to fly. And of course, they are now kicking off. And to be honest, as we've said, their ultimate objective is to get rid of the Belfast Agreement, something that a lot of, again, conservatives, including Henry Hill, do not seem to ever acknowledge that is also one of their stated goals. Just something to bear in mind. So, that quote should be printed out and stuck to the monitor of anyone who speculates about why the DUP are being so stubborn about returning to the Assembly, alongside their poll ratings at least. So, the question is, what sort of outcome could hit a sweet spot and deliverable now? But it is worth also Jeffrey Donaldson cashing in on his most valuable bargaining chip. So, one answer might suggest one answer suggested to me this week was anything that delivers a proper dual standard regime in Northern Ireland and undermines the fundamental principles of the single market in the province. The logic is, at present, even were the protocol being properly enforced, which it never has been and never will be, because we've been the ones refusing to implement it properly, Henry, might be worth, pointing that out to your readers, but there you go. It nevertheless represents a fracturing of the full fat single market, which is supposed to cover goods, services, capital, and labour. Ulster is only in the single market for goods. Whilst it isn't perfectly formed by any means, Britain was often frustrated by the slow development of the single market in services. For example, it is not supposed to get broken up like that. Witness the David Cameron's unhappy efforts to negotiate a deal which might, from Brussels' perspective, have undermined the single market in labour by restricting freedom of movement. Again, that was never, ever really going to happen. You have to have freedom of movement. Freedom of goods and labour is an integral part to having a single market, and certainly the way it has been sort of proved to be so often. Not only that, there were rules and regulations that David Cameron's government could have brought in, but they just never did. Why? Because, again, people like Cameron and probably even Henry Hill do not want to even admit that the UK was pretty much addicted to cheap labor, and it loved the fact that it could just use its business to just reach out and just grab labor from the EU. Not a lot of people really, especially on the conservative side, want to openly actually admit that, but that was a big factor in that. So, so from the EU's perspective, therefore, the status quo is problematic. Status quo isn't problematic at all. The status quo should be that the protocol works. Now, even the EU does recognize that there are problems on the protocol, but these problems are not insurmountable. They can be solved, but these negotiations are all about really highly technical, like, things. But they can be solved by sitting down and actually talking about them. But you have the DUP, you have the ERG, and certainly the very pro-Brexit government that we have that just goes, we're not going to talk with the EU at all. We're just ignoring you completely. And that is the situation that we are in. And it will only get more problematic from the exceptional Northern Ireland situation it becomes. It is harder to plead the immovable nature of the EU institutions to countries such as Poland, which might seek special agreements on judicial matters when the high-profile counter-example exists. That's completely different. Absolutely completely different. You cannot compare the fact that you have had Poland's Supreme Court go time and time again to at least try and rule or overturn what are EU standards and certainly rulings and regulations. That is what matters to the whole single market. The idea is that we all follow the same rules. Now you've had now that is very much a legal sort of situation when it comes to them. What you have here is trading agreements and how it works. They are not the two of the same things. I would argue that they are not comparable to each other. So, returning to the current negotiations, the EU has apparently conceded the principle that goods from the mainland which enter Northern Ireland and stay there should be treated differently than those, pardon me, travelling onwards to the single market proper. This concession has been made easier by the accumulation of evidence that the seepage of such goods across the border is low. So, low now, but what if? This is what the data sharing agreement was all about a couple of weeks ago, which, again, Tories and certainly the Brexiteers, even the DUP, were flipping out. How dare the government do this? This is conceding, this is capitulating to the EU. But the EU wants to know that, someone might not just lie and transport these goods to Northern Ireland and say, oh, yes, these goods are only going to stay in Northern Ireland, and then ship them into the EU. You need guarantees. You need things like this. And the thing is, originally, this idea was shipped before, but the UK government rejected it because they could not come up with an actual idea to sort of safeguard how these products would be guaranteed to stay in the Northern Ireland market. So, back to it. So London can also point out that large parts of the protocol have never been implemented. Yes, because they've refused to implement them, and that's London has refused to implement them, not the EU. And if that was going to cause dangerous disruptions to the single market, we would have seen them by now. Except we have seen them by now, Henry. There is evidence to see that there have been goods coming in from Ireland which have not been meeting sort of certain standards. That's because they have been sort of checked a number of times. But hey, there you go. So thus, the idea of the red and green lanes, this idea is not guaranteed to give Donaldson and his allies a deal worth accepting, but it could. No, because Henry, you and the rest of the Conservatives are not listening to what the DUP are saying. They are expressly saying, we do not want that bordering the Irish Sea. It does not matter that it's now a red lane and a green lane because they do not want that border in the Irish Sea. They did 7 points, all pretty much saying, we don't want that border in the Irish Sea. For some reason, Conservatives just seem to completely blank out this whole idea that and just ignore that that's what the DUP is saying. And just say, oh, there's just problems with the protocol, but we'll sort it out. Then the DUP will be happy. No, the DUP want rid of that border in the Irish Sea completely. Is no one in the Conservative Party actually listening to what the DUP are actually saying? It's kind of worrying, to be honest. So, a D- version, which is creating a static carve-out for a fixed range of problematic goods, would not be worth it. Northern Ireland will remain subject to the ever-growing body of law over which it has no political input, and the function of which would be to gradually de-align its economy with that of the rest of the country. But it's still in the EU and single market, and if you look at how Northern Ireland is performing economically at the moment, it seems to be doing pretty well. It seems to be doing pretty well, especially when you compare it to the other regions. Of course, you take out London, of course. It seems to be doing pretty well. But at least you can see the whole thing with the sort of de-aligning from the rest of the sort of the UK. But I would argue, why are you so eager for the UK to de-align? And as we've said before, the UK is going to be trapped in the EU's regulatory orbit. That's not going to change. So, but we continue on. But imagine instead a version like the one I outlined last Monday. The quote, EU regulations, which the ECJ oversight, only applying to those firms exporting into the single market. A default of unfettered trade between Ulster and the mainland. But how do you know those goods are only going to stay in Northern Ireland? You don't. And I mean, it's not like a company could just lie. I mean, I don't know whether Henry Hill understands the concept of businesses might actually lie to get their goods into the single market by just saying, oh no, these are only go to Northern Ireland. Trust us, Scout's honor, cross my heart, governor. This is why the whole Northern Ireland Protocol is a complete and absolute utter mess, because this is a UK idea that now the UK doesn't want to fully implement because it knows the dangers about it and all the problems it would create. Even the EU's like, look, we know this isn't perfect, but hey, we can do sort of these deals and sort of, make sure it's all ideal to help things flow better, but it's never going to be 100% perfect. Again, this is meant to be the oven-ready deal, but hey, I wonder why we're having all these problems, right? But with the data-led enforcement of problem cases, again, how do you know? Because if they're entering, lying about their data, how can you enforce it? But anyway, he continues, and of course, local business subject to British law by default, not least so they're on a fair competitive firms with mainland competitors. What about the fact that they are in the EU? If EU regulations, again, as we are to say that they are in the single market customs union, that means that EU law trumps British law, meaning that any businesses that decide to sort of follow these British deregulations or any type of law means the fact that you get the EU problem. How do you know that those goods made in Northern Ireland are going to only stay in sort of the British market? How do you know they're not going to go into the EU? There is no thought about this whatsoever. But anyway, it continues. So this obviously would be ideal. What? No, wouldn't. Rooted as it is in the May era capitulation, on the idea that the Belfast Agreement somehow demanded no change whatsoever to the North-South trade. Again, not understanding why the Belfast Agreement, because of course, if you put a border there, that does affect North-South trade. And of course, the Belfast Agreement, Henry, says you cannot have a border there. It just... So, but it would adequately solve the problem. No, it wouldn't. The problem is certainly on governance of the East-West trade and prevent the gradually dragging of the Ulster economy away from Great Britain. Again, this is pretty much been guaranteed by Brexit. Something which, again, the Brexiteers say, Northern Ireland, not going to be a problem. Crucially, the only way such a deal would ever fly is if you had the, quote, granular data to allow of targeting interventions and hands-off approach to the frontier. Shooting down such data agreements on sovereignty grounds is one way the ERG and the DUP could make the perfect enemy of the good. And of course, they have been doing that. So, yet again, Conservative Home tries to come up with, solving the Northern Ireland Protocol deal is going to be easy. It's going to be easy, guys. It's going to be easy. Trust us. Easy solve. Listen, just my mate down the pub told me this is how you solve the Northern Ireland Protocol. That generally sounds like what's been happening here. But I'll tell you now, it sounds like your mate down the pub knows absolutely nothing what he's talking about, because again, doesn't seem to acknowledge the true reason why the DUP are opposing this. Again, it's to really further their true objective, which is to eventually get rid of the Good Friday Agreement, because they absolutely hate it. They also want to virulently get rid of the border between the UK and Northern Ireland. That is their stated objective. Even if you do create that red and green lane, that doesn't get rid of the border, which they hate so much. That is the reason why they have stated so often they are not going to return to Stormont. Not only that, you then create the entire premise that Northern Ireland essentially becomes an amazing smuggler's paradise. Because, I'm just bringing my goods in from the UK into Northern Ireland, and then, whoops, they've somehow ended up in the EU. How could this happen? Again, it doesn't really reflect the reality of what we've been talking about for years, the problems here in Northern Ireland. And of course, these continue to sort of flow on again and again and again. And here we are still with Conservatives coming up with absolutely non-started ideas on how they could solve the Northern Ireland Protocol problem. So, second time trying from Conservative Home, but yet it's yet and again another swing and a miss from them, because they don't understand the larger problems that are at play here in Northern Ireland. So, as always, thank you very much for watching, and of course, we'll see you all next time.